All right. Good evening, everybody. Sorry, we're 2 minutes behind here. We were just troubleshooting some last-minute tech issues with Caleb's setup, but I think we got everything focused right now or figured out. So, welcome back to the Resilient Future series. This is our last call in the series, and this is call number 7. So, if you haven't been with us up until this date, maybe first off, just go over to the chat. Let us know where you're coming in from tonight. It'd be nice to hear where folks are coming in from. And just know that you can communicate in the chat throughout the night this evening. Let us know. Can you hear me okay too? Yeah, awesome. Looks like people can. Yeah, so as I said, this is session number 7 in our Resilient Future series. And for those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, the whole intention behind this series was a group of us kind of recognizing the stress and overwhelm that a lot of people were feeling around how fast the world appears to be changing. And on all different planes, whether we're looking at environmental change and climate change, species change, economic change and financial change, technology change, like there's a lot happening right now and it's a little bit intense. And simultaneously, I very strongly believe that the next 20 years are not going to look anything like the last 20 years. And I have a real concern that, as a species, as a culture, we're not actually keeping up to those changes, and that things are maybe going to shift faster than people are ready for. So the whole intention behind this series was basically facing this big change and this overwhelm and some of these big topics from a positive and a proactive approach. So the whole theme of the series is practical solutions to uncertain times. And we've been bringing in a whole host of amazing guests and innovators that are doing really cool things across a broad range of topics. We had Shannon Lee Simmons on, and we were actually talking about financial resiliency. We had Dr. Noman Naeem on, and we were talking about emotional resiliency. I did a piece on emergency preparedness. We had Verge Permaculture on, doing some stuff on permaculture design and anti-fragility. Andrew McMartin was on last week talking about how do we prepare youth for uncertainty. He's the director of the Pine Project. We had Starhawk and Charles from Earth Activist Training on, Yara Willard talking about health. So all of those past sessions, if you missed any of them, I'm including the links. Yeah, so if someone's there, Elke's asking about replays. So all the emails that I've been sending out about the series and the one that you would have just got if you just registered, all the links to the replays are down at the bottom. And I'm going to send out one more follow-up email after tonight. So it'll have the replay from tonight, but I'll list the replays for all the sessions so far. So just a quick little piece there on the replay. This series is hosted by myself. So I run Chris Outdoors. My name is Chris Gilmour. And Chris Outdoors, we're all about helping people reconnect to the land in powerful ways, and letting us empower our vision and our work in the world, as well as helping people build skills of self-reliance and resiliency. So everything from like growing food and mushrooms to learning about hunting and survival and things of that nature, but all through the lens of nature connection and sustainability. It's also co-hosted by Earth Activist Training. And we have Charles Williams from Earth Activist with us tonight. Charles is in the chat. Charles, can you just say hey again to the group there? Yeah, so if you see Charles saying anything in the chat tonight, he's actually, if one of us mentions a resource or anything like that, he'll be putting the links up there. But if you see any links posted from Charles, he's kind of capturing things as they go through the night, or some of the things that come up here tonight. We have 2 amazing guests on us with our last call tonight, the grand finale. I'm really excited about. We have Caleb Musgrave. Caleb runs Canadian Bushcraft. He's from over on Hiawatha First Nation. Really, really amazing dude. He's been a mentor of mine and a good friend of mine as well. And we have my wife, another amazing person, Laura Gilmour, who runs Wild Muskoka Botanicals. And Laura is basically a professional forager. And tonight's theme is going to be all around resiliency when it comes to food. So we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of food security and what that means. We're going to be talking about, how to grow more food, how to build local food systems, and also how to integrate things like foraging and sustainable hunting and fishing practices into our local food networks to be more resilient. And I think this is a very timely topic as we see food prices going up really high, really quick, and we see the major supply chain issues happening in the world. Local food just feels super important to me. It's something I'm really passionate about myself. So that's where we're going to be going with tonight's call. I'm going to invite our guests on in just a moment here. But before I do that, we've been starting off each of these calls with a little bit of gratitude. I've kind of been speaking about how, keeping a positive attitude and recognizing gratitude is a survival skill in and of itself, especially during hard times. So it seems just like good neural network patterning to start our calls off with a bit of gratitude. So my gratitude tonight is for these waves of birds coming in. And some of you down south might not even be able to wrap your head around this, but we literally had the first robins come back like a week ago. We still have a ton of snow on the land here. I'm up in an area called Muskoka near Algonquin Park in central Ontario. We're in the Williams Treaty territory of the Anishinaabe people, particularly the Chippewa and the Mississauga. Yeah, like it was about, well, let me think. If I track it back, the very first birds, like in February, the crows started coming back. And then as we got into March, it was pretty quiet for a while. And then it came in the robins. Then right after them was the juncos. And then I think it was the woodcock I heard after that. And then last night we had this big southern wind, like a pretty strong breeze. And this morning, suddenly there's sparrows back, all kinds of different things. The forest was just a symphony. So I'm just super thankful for the birds this morning. And I've been saying this every call, but I'm super thankful for the people that tend the land in these wild spaces in a good way. And I think to, Caleb's people, the Anishinaabe that have been tending this land for literally thousands of years, much gratitude to the people that have both tended the land for so long and continue to tend it and to pass on those skills, and to people around the world that continue to tend the land, the Indigenous peoples around the world, and anybody who has a sincere desire to live in right relationships with the earth. That's my gratitude tonight. So as I call on our guests, I'm going to ask Laura and Caleb to come on stage, and I'll invite you to share something you're feeling thankful for in the chat tonight. And then we're going to dive into tonight's topic on food. But Laura, if you want to come back on stage, Caleb, you could turn your camera back on. Hopefully we still got you okay.
Hello.
Hey, Laura, while we're waiting for Caleb to come on, what are you feeling thankful for tonight?
I'm feeling thankful for this glass of maple sap that I have to drink, with the temperatures staying above freezing now. We'll be pulling the taps tomorrow. So just this incredible mineral-rich, nourishing, sweet water that pours out of the ground, or that pours out of the trees. Awesome. Up from the ground. So feeling thankful for the maple trees and this maple sap right now.
Caleb, do we got you?
You got me.
Awesome. So glad we got that worked. I'm thankful that we got the tech worked out.
Me too.
Yeah. Caleb, what are you feeling grateful for tonight before we dive in?
I am feeling grateful for it being 21 degrees for most of today where I am, and actually sweating for the first time outside in like 7 months. So this is, we already went through what we call Ziguan in my culture. So hi everybody, my name's Caleb from Hiawatha First Nation, I'm Mississauga and Anishinaabe. And Ziguan is that time of the sap that Laura was just talking about, how it finished about a week and a half ago for us here. That is our New Year's. That is Anishinaabe New Year's. And so getting everybody together in the bush and harvesting that sap and seeing the change. We've been watching the geese and the sandhill cranes and all these beings coming back into our landscape. We saw our first bears 1.5 weeks ago. Mother bear with her 2 cubs crossing the main road in my community last weekend, not this weekend, the weekend before. And so life is back. This is the actual proper New Year. I have a moth flying around, the only light I have around me right now. So you see a bunch of flitting shadows. Life is back. That's what I'm thankful for, is we're back and we're doing things that we're supposed to be doing. I've been mixing up soil and all that kind of stuff, getting ready for the year, for growing. My dogs are tracking mud into the house and into the bed and everywhere. So it's been great. So yeah, that's what I'm thankful for.
Awesome. Well, so nice to have both of you on here tonight and to kick this series, not kick it off, but wrap it up in a good way. So yeah, let's chat. Let's start with this general idea of food security and homesteading. I think would be a great place to start. A lot of people, I think there was this old definition of homesteading that, people thought back to maybe like Little House on the Prairie or like those old movies where, you'd buy 100 or 200 acres out in the woods or off in the wilderness, and you'd clear the land and you'd have animals and whatever. And, I think a lot of people maybe think of that today, but what excites me is this whole new wave of kind of like permaculture inspired homesteading, where people are actually growing incredible amounts of food in small spaces. And as I say, Laura when we were chatting about this earlier today, she was talking about how you go down to the Toronto and down to the city, and there's people that grow amazing amounts of food in small spaces, and some of those are coming from particular cultural lineages that have been doing that for a long time. So I think we want to chat a little bit about like kind of redefining this idea of the homestead needing to be this like 200-acre property. And particularly if we work in community and with our neighbors, we might be able to look at reworking local systems, whether urban or rural, to produce incredible amount of food really, really quickly, and probably more sustainable and regenerative than what we're doing right now. So starting at that point, maybe Laura, we've been on together on this journey for the last 20 years. We've had our homestead for 12 years right now. You want to maybe just start by kind of sharing some of your general thoughts on some of the big lessons or takeaways, or what do you want to say about that journey that would be relevant for people that are trying to think about how they can be more food secure?
Yeah. It's interesting when I think about the fact that we are really blessed and really privileged to have what is considered like a large chunk of land, but the actual workable land from a growing farming perspective is really small. And our property that we live on a forested property, 26 acres outside of Algonquin Park, for people that don't know Chris or I. And I feel really blessed to steward this land, but the area that we actually grow in is maybe like 1/8 of an acre, and it's like hills and sandy soil, and it's not cleared. We have to some areas we actually have to try to clear the forest to grow. So in some ways, we compared to an open farm, the land that we grow on is really limited. And so I feel like we've actually had to be pretty creative. And I had to really break down even my own thoughts of what I thought a homestead was going to look like. It's really, I think about this full circle thing. It's so interesting. So I did Earth Activist Training permaculture design course in 2005. So almost 20 years ago. And I carried this dream of wanting my own permaculture homestead one day. And we have it, but what's interesting is it doesn't actually look anything like I thought my drawn out permaculture farm would look like. Very much because having to look at the landscape, having to really change my mindset around our little local resources and kind of accept losses. I thought at this point, 12 years in, we would have established fruit apple trees, and I was going to grow Asian pears, and I was going to do all the, I pictured all these things for myself. And what I realized is it doesn't look like that. So though sometimes I've had to let go of what I perceived as failures, like when we put all the apple trees in and they got that blight that is here, but we have amazing blueberry bushes, and rabbits are something that has been an incredible learning journey around food. And I've really developed a relationship with acorns, and brassicas are key crops for us. And it's not what I pictured it to look like. I think because I really have learned over the years, putting aside the mindset of going into it, I'm going to create this thing, and looking at it as very much a relationship with the land, is I'm coming forward with a set of skills that I'm working on, and skills that I have, but I'm also wanting to be in relationship with the land, which means being open to feedback and being open to changing your plan. Because as we know with our human relationships, we have to be willing to give and take. And that is very much in building a relationship with, whether it's your little backyard, garden, or a farm, 50-acre farm that you purchase and project you begin. Really getting that humbleness that it's going to be a give and take, and you have to be willing to accept that feedback and just continue to keep going and learning from those mistakes and not letting yourself shut down because of perceived failures. Chris, I can't.
I'll jump in here for a second to say I can't speak. Can you hear me now?
Sorry, yeah. I was muted there. I was just
Oh.
saying there that, it's so easy to dream of what we want and dream of this ideal situation and overlook what's right in front of us. And the other thing I think you just named there, Laura, was that, the first principle in permaculture, or one of the principles of permaculture, is this idea of observe and interact, actually watching the land. And Elaine from Verge talked about that in his presentation a few weeks back there, just taking the time to understand, how does the water flow across my land? How does the sun flow across my land? How does it interact different times of the season? And then, how do I start to design and work within that? So that was really beautifully said there. Maybe the other thing I think that'd be worth highlighting there, for folks that don't have a lot of land now, or maybe they're even transient or moving around, one thing I think that we did really well, and I'm really proud of, is we spent a lot of time learning skills before we actually got the homestead. Because I know a lot of people will go and buy land and then they're totally overwhelmed. Do you want to speak to that?
Did we lose Caleb there for a minute? Well, I can definitely talk till he gets back. But
yeah, well, that question was.
I'm here. I'm just listening to you, and I figured I'd turn my microphone and my camera off.
So I was having this conversation with a good friend the other day in preparation for this talk, and we were just talking about how important it is to not wait until all the conditions are right and to start wherever you're at. So whether it's just like growing potatoes in a bag on your balcony, or really just in really small, whatever opportunity, you can volunteer, if you don't have access to farm, volunteer on farms. Like, I spent a lot of time just traveling around and going to different places and working on different properties in different capacities, so that I could learn, even if you're growing the potatoes in the bag and it ends up being a failure, or you get a pest, like, you learn that pest, or you make this mistake, or, you grow this unruly tomato plant in a pot, but then you learn about pruning, and any little single skill that you can grow. Any mistake, particularly mistakes. Oh my gosh, someone's even saying that mistakes are the life lessons. And it's like, homesteading, I feel like you have successes for sure. Like, we're eating every day. We eat from food that we grew here or foraged, but I've learned so much from I've learned more from my failures than I probably have from my successes. So I think waiting to the ideal conditions is, you'll never get there if you wait to you're like, you finally get the farm. Look at it as you're learning the skills. You want to learn these skills under the best conditions before you actually are relying on these food systems.
Awesome. Yeah. And the other one I just think there too is, I've heard people just be like, well, what's the point? I can do so little in the space that I have, or in the time that I have. But if you literally just start dabbling, like, as your knowledge grows, then you're able to be more creative with how you work with it. And it's amazing what you can do in a small space. I mean, Caleb, I'm going to get you to jump back on here, but Caleb doesn't work a lot of land either. He's over on Hiawatha First Nation. I've been over into his garden quite a few times and watched it evolve over the last couple of years. I think your garden is probably similar size to ours. It might even be a little bit smaller, and you produce a ton of food there, Caleb. Like, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on kind of working small spaces and food security from
that. So it comes from, like, my upbringing. My mother's family were homesteaders from Gaspésie over in Quebec, and my father's family were Anishinaabeg here in Hiawatha that grew food to support themselves. And we targeted our yard to be the garden, the portion of the forest that we had behind our house, into a garden years ago, and we just started to grow other things in the meantime, because it's a real thick forest behind us that we had to start getting cleared and actually think of how we want to do it. And so I didn't actually start the proper big garden until 2020, coincidentally at the same time that the pandemic kicks on. I was like, perfect timing, why not? And now I have no one to help me except for my wife, who's busy teaching. So I can't have her help me during the daytime. I have to just clear the land myself and figure it out on my own. And I chose to do a 1/4 acre for several reasons. First off, 1/4 acre is the maximum of our yard for the garden. That's including the duck pen and the composting areas and everything. That's not the actual growing space. And the first reason I chose that is because I'm an educator. I was like, well, the average North American suburb yard lawn is a 1/4 acre. So if I can do this, anyone can do this. And that was the first thing. The second reason is I have a busted back and I'm lazy. I don't want to clear acres upon acres. We have 3 acres in total on the property. I'm going to leave a lot of that alone because I'm on my own. I want to do this easy. So I cleared just what I needed to start growing, and we produce about 60% of our food from our garden, from the growing and the raising of the ducks. We get currently we're getting about 10,000 eggs a day, it feels like. And then beyond that, building up the soil so that we can grow better things and building up what we refer to as a food forest, though traditionally that's just a forest. That's what the East Coast, the Eastern woodlands were up until later Western European settlement. You listen to Verrazano's reports, and he would describe the Eastern woodlands as this park-like estate where everything was edible, as if it was the Garden of Eden that was gifted to the Europeans by God. It was gifted to you by us. We built that. We built that stuff. I got to make sure I don't swear too much on this show. This is not my podcast, so I'm used to cussing my head off on there. We built that for them. We built that ecosystem, and so doing that as an Anishinaabe just feels right. It feels simple, and it's doable for anybody. There, you can grow. I've seen amazing things in the middle of the Utah deserts and the Colorado deserts and the Utah mountains. I've seen stuff happening in the Arctic now with incredible food growing projects and initiatives all over the world. And so homesteading, people describe it as that old classic. It's the difference of a rural village and a homestead is community. The classical perspective of what a homestead is independence. You are self-reliant. I always laugh at the term self-reliant because I'm not self-reliant if I rely on eggs, ducks, compost, crops, trees. I'm not self-reliant. I'm completely reliant on the ecosystem I'm in. And so from that perspective, trying to build a homestead or a garden of any kind can happen in a small city apartment, a large 200-acre property, or anything in between and beyond, by simply being creative enough to figure out, like what Laura was talking about. You can set up an aero garden or a hydroponic system in a closet in your apartment. It's 100% doable, and you can grow a lot of greens there. You can grow some crops as well on those, depending on what your system is. So to me, it's more about not being self-reliant, not necessarily being independent, because I argue that community is a big part of it all. I argue that you look at a lot of people who lived on the land for long periods. They were nations, they were communities, they were tribes, because it works better than trying to be out there on your own. The image of the mountain man and the image of Little House on the Prairie is a myth. People relied on each other all the dang time. So that's a big part of it for me, is trying to teach people, to educate people on building a community around food, because that's really the main reason to have a community, is to share the wealth.
Awesome. Yeah. And, when I think about, our self-reliance, because I do use that term a lot, but I don't think about it probably in that classical homestead self-reliant, meaning like us on our little piece of land, it is in relation. And, for us, even just the realities of working in the modern world, like for us to grow all of our own food, I think we could probably do it, but it would be a full-time job and a lot of work, and not realistic with having to pay a mortgage as well. And because of that, we're starting to build these relationships with other people that grow food. I mean, you and I, every time we see each other, we're trading gifts from the garden. We raise rabbits at our place, and we've started actually trading our rabbits. And, on a small piece of land, we're not necessarily going to have cows or pigs or goats. But on our small piece of land, now what we're doing is actually trading our rabbits for meat birds. We actually traded some rabbit for some beef this year. Because we have a friend who goes, and he doesn't raise beef either. He has another little homestead, but he goes and helps a lady do her hay every year. And in exchange for helping her do her hay, he gets a bunch of beef. So now he's got more beef than his family needs, and we do rabbits on our homestead. So now we're trading a little bit of our rabbit for a little bit of the beef that he traded for doing hay. And I think those are the types of community relationships that suddenly allow us to take a leap forward in our food security as we can start to map them out. I want to ask both of you this question. If you were to think about the things on your homestead, though, that make the biggest difference for you in reaching some degree of food security, because, there's a lot of stuff that we grow that's kind of fun. For example, we grow bell peppers in our greenhouse, but they take up a ton of space. They take up a ton of work, a ton of nutrients. And we get 2 meals from our bell peppers. The bell peppers aren't about food security for me. The bell peppers are about a fun stuffed pepper once a year that I grew myself. What are the elements on your garden and in your homesteading setup or if you don't want to call it a homestead, whatever you want to call your food growing practices, what are the elements that actually have been like made big differences in reaching some degree of food security? And that can include your piece of land as well, or relationships with other people.
Who wants to go first?
I think
Okay.
Caleb's passing it to you. That was a hand
He's
gesture.
always such a gentleman. He's always like, ladies first. What I think the one that I can think that I felt like was really a game changer for us was actually getting the rabbits. You just spoke to them. And I'll say why in a few ways. Probably the biggest is the area that we're in. When we bought this house, I was really thankful. So the Muskoka area is known for its granite rock. And the individual property that we're on is actually on one of the rarer sand deposits. So we have really good drainage, which is great, but our soils are sand and silt. And so they're pretty nutrient poor. So we were growing beautiful vegetable gardens for years, but we were still having to bring in a lot of soil inputs. And that never really felt truly sustainable in that kind of true definition, self-sustaining, in the sense that the garden, the ecology of this land wasn't able to support the food that we were trying to produce from it, because we had to keep bringing in garden inputs every year. And so when we got the rabbits, one of the things we were most excited about was actually just the manure that they would produce, because one thing that's incredible about rabbit manure is that it's hopefully people can hear me. Someone just said they can't hear me. But
I think most people can. Yeah. If you can't hear Laura, just log out and log back in if you're having issues.
So one of the things about rabbit manure is that it's can be used on a garden directly, and they make a lot of manure. And the year after we'd gotten the rabbits, so we had, that year of rabbit manure immediately was the first year that we didn't have to bring in soil amendments. And it was that being able to close that loop of not having to buy soil amendments and seeing the richness that rabbit manure brought to everything else on the property in terms for plant growth. We're still I'm still seeing the positive benefits. The other thing is just then I'm able to actually upcycle. So I upcycle, a lot of different vegetable crops that even I wasn't doing with the chickens, like greens and certain weeds. The rabbits do really well, and it's actually been really incredible because we live in the forest. We have like coppice growth trees, like shrubby bushes. Like we're basically, some of our weeds are actually things like beaked hazel and red maples that we just have a really hard time getting rid of. And the rabbits will even eat woody material, which is pretty incredible. So being able to upcycle the vegetation material and turn it into not just manure, but now meat. And then also knowing that after we cook those animals, and then we cook them in a pressure cooker and we get all this incredible meat off of them. And then I make stock from their bones with medicinal mushrooms that we forage, and then like herbs that we've grown and other wild plants. And then I get this incredible stock from the bones and, can use that as the base. I harvest all their, the fat rises on it and I cook with the fat. And then their bones go into the compost. And so it's just like, and the other thing is because we live in the forest with lots of forest predators, we have a big dog, and our dog eats every single piece of the rabbit that we don't. Like nothing gets wasted from those animals, and they are in turn taking what's already abundant on this individual property, and we're able to upcycle it through those incredible little bites. And they're like really beautiful creatures to be in relationship with. Like they're cute and fuzzy and like fun. Like playing with baby bunnies like a few times a year is like so much fun. So there's like joy and love, and like obviously like, you know, there's grief that can come with it too when you are in those very, very intimate relationships of life and death with animals. But what incredible kin they have been, and just the way that they have enhanced all of the other crops on our property has probably been the main, recently has really been the game changer for us in this property. And I think about how rabbit was a really important, if you are from a temperate northern, you know, lineage, regardless of what your ancestry is, rabbit was probably a core part of your traditional diet in Europe and Turtle Island. And something I learned was that rabbit doesn't it's not very suitable for industrial growing, because they kind of are like the canary in the coal mine. If you give them kind of like really difficult conditions, they will get sick really quickly. They're not tolerant to the kind of gross conditions that we know industrial meat processing is. So those animals became poor people's food, and then no one wanted to eat them after the Second World War. We were taught that rabbit was poor people's food, and we've lost this incredible food source, whether it's wild rabbit or farmed rabbit, that's actually really healthy for us because of industrialization. So I actually also feel like rebellious to be like, I am reclaiming rabbit as like a core staple food. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to just hit on a couple other points on there too on it, and then I'll pass it over to Caleb with that same question. Lo, maybe you can take a look too. There's a couple questions that came up there, so maybe you can take a skim at those and even answer a couple of those after me before we pass it over to Caleb. But yeah, there's a couple other things I wanted to share there. You know, so we raise chickens, and a lot of people, when you think about homesteading, that's like the first thing. It's like, oh, I want to get chickens and I want to have eggs. And we've had chickens since almost the beginning of having our property. And interesting enough, I don't actually think our chickens make us very self-sufficient or sustainable at all, because we're completely reliant on the grain store. And our chickens are actually reliant on the grain store using petrochemicals to ship in grains that we're growing a long ways away. And don't get me wrong, I love having chickens. I absolutely encourage you to do it. But we would need to really get creative with how to produce a chicken food on site. And we've actually, Laura and I have brainstormed a lot about that, and we have some ideas of how we would do it, but we're definitely not there yet. But I feel pretty confident that we could actually feed the rabbits completely from the land, which means no need for petrochemicals and no need for the distribution lines and no need for the feed store up the land. And then the second thing, you know, I mean, the daily eggs are great. Don't get me wrong at all. But like one rabbit is like a week of food for Laura and I. We'll eat 4 meals of one rabbit. And that doesn't include the stock that we have afterwards. So 4 meals of meat plus the stock. And then, as you said, we're now upcycling the bone. Our dog's getting a little bit of it. So it's building soil. And if you think about all those different layers to it, there's this term in permaculture called stacking functions. It's, you know, if you have limited space or limited time, how many things can you incorporate, or how many functions can you stack in kind of the same space or into the same activity so it has multiple different outputs and uses? And then how do you recycle that back in to feed something else in the system? So starting to get creative about those closed loop systems. The only other thing I wanted to share about that too is folks that are in smaller situations or urbans. The first person I ever saw growing rabbits was actually doing it in a suburban backyard, and like a very tiny suburban backyard too. He literally built vertical rabbit hutches with a little playpen underneath of it, and it wasn't any bigger than like a kid's playpen area. And he was growing a ton of rabbits there in a very small space in an urban area. So it's definitely an urban possibility as well. Laura, did you check out those questions? And then Caleb, you're up next. A couple things on the homestead that have been kind of game changers for you in food. So
I'll just hit those questions real quick. So different from chicken manure, you can use rabbit manure right away. Separating the pellets from the urine. So our rabbit hutches, the summertime hutches drop so they have like a wire bottom, and then we give the rabbits like wooden boards and things to rest their feet on. But their poops drop through the wire onto the ground, and then so the urine just actually goes into the soil, and then we just can collect the pellets, and then a number of the pellets like just end up in the compost, but you can also top dress plants. But we most of the time just still compost it, because you get like spilled feed and things in it, but it builds the compost fast, and it really activates the compost. And so now our compost isn't just vegetable scraps, it's vegetable scraps, manure mixed together. And yeah, a few people have mentioned like it would be hard if you killing rabbits that you have raised from is probably the hardest part of raising rabbits, just because they are cute and fuzzy, and in our culture we like tend to prop up those animals over ones that have feathers or skin. But I've just really over the years have been just building my animist philosophy of like trying to hold the same care and love and reverence for the rabbits that I raise as I do for the plants that I harvest. And just and actually allow myself to shed tears and feel grief. And when I walk, like one of the things with rabbits is say, handle the rabbits a lot, because then they get comfortable to human touch. And then if you ever need to do medical care or that last walk, when I pick that rabbit up from the hutch and I'm walking it to the area that we're going to, like our kill station, I am just holding that rabbit. I remember this moment last year where I was walking the rabbits through our garden, and I just had so much love, and the tears are just streaming down my face. And I'm holding them with so much love as I walked through the garden that they also were feeding. And there's grief there, but I just think it's so important to anchor that grief with love. And I just allow that love to pour through, and not think about how much gratitude I have for this being that's going to continue the life in my garden. It's going to continue my own life. So yeah, it's part of being a human, like being alive is also being in relationship with death.
Yeah, so beautifully said, Lo. And it's a tough thing if you haven't been brought around it, but I find it a really intimate way to actually create with, or to connect with the give and take of life, and just make that real, because it happens every day. And a rabbit's natural lifespan in the wild is not very long. An average rabbit lives months. It's rare for a rabbit to be more than a year old, because they get eaten. They produce multiple litters per year with many, many babies per litter, because natural design is that they're not going to live more than a few months. That's kind of part of the cycle. And by harvesting them ourselves, it's this really intimate reflection on how nature actually works and our relationship with life and death. So there is some really beautiful pieces in that as well. Caleb, I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts. What have been some big game changers for you guys as far as your food security?
First off, I want to thank you, Laura, for saying what you said there about taking that life. Years ago, I got to witness Navajo kill a sheep, and the way that they had that relationship with that sheep is resonating with what you're talking about. That intimate relationship and that loving, kind, tender part of life taking. People look at life taking as this horrifying Eli Roth horror film kind of stuff, and it isn't. It's a beautiful, intimate moment that is just as how I want to go. I want to have that love and kindness around me when I go. So thank you for bringing that up. We thought about rabbits, and so that's part of the system is like livestock. The term I'm not a big fan of because of how we've kind of commercialized the term and corporatized the term into this giant machine boxes that have a bunch of chickens living in them that don't ever get to see the light of day. But I raise birds. For me, there's like three things that I knew I needed to have with my homestead. I needed to have really, really good soil. I needed to have dependable foods that don't fail me at the worst times. And I needed to have the tools to make this all work. So, and that could be really low scale. My tools when I cleared my land and started building up my land was a shovel, a rake, a chainsaw, and this specific machete right here. Don't ask why I have it just sitting beside me. And that's the number one rural tool in the world. If you're looking for the number one rural hand tool to work anywhere in the world, machete, 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 machete. 80% of the world that lives on the land relies on a machete more than any other hand tool. So, and they're cheap to buy. So if you don't have to feel bad about paying for them, because they're not like a expensive hunting knife or a rifle or anything. They're very inexpensive to buy. So that's the number one thing, is the right kind of hand tools to be able to do what you got to do where you are, whether that's a spade and a shovel and a fork, or a machete and a chainsaw and a pickaxe, whatever it may be. The main thing for soil for me was I have the opposite problem that Laura and Chris have. I have clay, and I have dense, impenetrable clay. I've literally planted daikon radishes and watched a daikon radish move 9 inches out of the soil in my yard because the clay is so dense it will not penetrate. And so, yeah, I could broad fork. Yeah, I could do all these different crazy things that people use with machines and tilling and all that stuff. Again, lazy and cheap. I don't have the money for all that kind of stuff, and I don't have the wherewithal to start with it. And so I began changing my soil by just saying, okay, that's now the subsoil. I'm going to make a new topsoil. I'm going to build soil up on top of it. And the original plan was rabbits. We're talking 10, 12 years ago when I first moved to this place, I started planning out rabbits. Got together with my now wife. She is deathly allergic to rabbits. We can't have them. We just can't have them. They get her to the point that she's asphyxiating if they're in the area around her, even just within the region. If I come in with their dander on my shirt, she can get sick. So that went out the window. And then I was looking at chickens, same kind of issues that Chris had with chickens. I have a problem with chickens. I also have close neighbors. I have a neighbor 10 yards to my right, 20 yards to my left. If I want to raise birds to be able to produce, that means I need to have a rooster, and I really don't want my neighbors to shoot my rooster. So I had to go with something else, and that was ducks. I went with waterfowl in general. Ironically, we have geese, which are louder than roosters, and I don't know why we have these damn geese, but regardless, we have geese. It was the ducks. I have mallard descendant domestic duck breeds, and I have Muscovy ducks. Muscovies are pre-Columbian indigenous duck from the Americas, mostly from South America into Central America, though there's arguments that there were some populations in Aztec territory as well in Mexico. And then the mallard family. So we have silver apple yards, which are a fancy fluffy duck because my wife loves the ducks. That's part of the same reasons that Laura loves her rabbits. It's the same reason my wife loves the ducks, and I love the ducks. They're cute. The silver apple yards are a heritage breed that are very, very pretty and very fluffy and fun to hold. If a kid comes over and wants to meet the ducks, that's the duck I show them because they're soft and fluffy and they're pretty and they don't bite or anything like that. If I bring my Muscovy duck Goliath over, biting is happening. He does not like to be held. And then we have Khaki Campbell Indian runner mixes. And then we have a couple of East Indies, which are a whole other thing we're not going to get into. But basically, we have several breeds of ducks that descended from the mallard family. And then we have several Muscovy ducks and then 2 geese. Would rather have no geese, but my wife loves her geese, so I'm not going to fight her on that. She has to tolerate me all the time, so I can accept that we're going to have geese. So that's just the balance we have in our relationship. Ducks
I
are.
think you owe her a few more geese for tolerating.
I know.
Caleb.
I know. We had 4. I convinced her to let me get rid of 2, and then I had to keep these 2. The reason we went with ducks was the same kind of issues and reasons that Laura had about and Chris have with their homestead regarding the rabbits. My ducks produce 2.2 pounds of feces a day. They are pooping every 5 minutes, and that's not an exaggeration by any means. I've clocked them. They will poop every 5 minutes. And so as they wander through my yard where I have them in this large pen, which I have loaded up with wood chips and charcoal and all this kind of stuff under the wood chip, which is what's sometimes referred to by Salatino and a few other people as a carbon diaper. It collects their feces, it breaks that, it decomposes that feces with the carbon mass that's there. And it is incredible how fast that soil is built. Within the first year, we had 2 inches of black soil on top of clay. That is insane when you think about the actual natural history of how long it takes for dirt to develop. It is absolutely insane that we were able to produce 2 inches of black organic soil on top of that clay. And we go beyond that. We produce a ton of compost. So we do a deep litter bed in their pen, in their coop. Sometimes people call it a duck pen or a duck coop or a duck house, apparently. different than chicken coops, I guess, or chicken runs. But anyways, we put all through the winter, we just keep adding more straw, more hemp, more whatever organic matter we have around that's carbon rich. And that means I can get it from neighbors who are doing lawn cuttings. I can do it from neighbors who grow other crops. I can take their straw. I can take their hay. I can also take their corn cob and their sunflower stalks and all that stuff and just throw it through a wood chipper and toss it in. So I've become more sustainable and more independent that way from me. And then we let it build up throughout the whole winter. It's building a little bit of heat because it's actually decomposing a bit. So it's keeping them warm inside the coop. But it's also covering the smell, and I don't have to clean as frequently because when you clean and actually fully sanitize, you got to wash it, and then you got water in a freezing condition. Never fun. So if you just throw more straw and other organic matter on top and just cover up the smell, then they just keep building up in there. And every once in a while, I'll spray like LAB, which is lactoactive bacteria. I just make from a rice wash, and then I feed that milk, and I take that liquid and I spray it through. You can learn all about that online. I'm not going to explain in detail. Anyways, at the end of the season, which is happening in a week for me, I pull 5 to 6 months of straw out of that coop, and I have a compost pile ready to go. And the first year of raising ducks and other waterfowl on our property, we produced just over 2,300 pounds of compost. When you compare that to how small amount of compost you get from kitchen scraps and everything else that people usually do, it sounds mind-boggling. When you have birds pooping every 5 minutes, it makes sense. You're going to have a lot of stuff to break down in compost. So we are able to build new beds every single year and have just enough left over to make a compost tea to apply on the older beds and basically reinvigorate all of them. And we're producing corn that is 17 feet tall. We're producing mammoth sunflower that lives up to its name. All that kind of stuff. The final thing, so I brought up tools, I brought up the soil. There's a ton of stuff in soil. We introduce biochar, we introduce terra preta concepts. We don't do a lot of hugelkultur where I live, and I don't do a lot of what's referred to as swaling. Swales being built on your property to try and catch water and other nutrient runoff and put it back in the soil. We don't do that because my entire property is a 65-degree hill. You put swales on that, you're just making waterfalls. It's just going to keep coming down and destroy even more stuff and create a lot of other problems, including flooding, because I live at the bottom of that hill. I'm in the basement that is below that hill. If I built a bunch of swales, this basement would be a swimming pool. So I don't do all that kind of stuff, but I do a lot of biochar, terra preta concepts, a lot of those kinds of perspectives. It's incredible how much we can do with soil. And we can talk all night about soil. I don't want to take up the entire night. So the final thing is crops or food sources that are dependent, reliable, regardless of the situation, regardless of the scenario, regardless of the conditions. And there's really only one that I talk about enough that's actually of any value to talk about, and that's sunchokes. I know a lot of people complain about sunchokes, that they refer to them as fartichokes. They refer to them as a bunch of other things that people can't stand. Sunchokes, I freaking love them. I roast them, I saute them, I make them into potato chips, I make them into cream of sunchoke soup, all kinds of things. And the more you eat it, the less gassy you get. So just get used to eating them, and the problem solves itself. We don't fertilize our sunchokes. We don't till our sunchokes. We don't prune our sunchokes. We don't even really irrigate them. We leave them alone. It started in a 2x2 square spot with like 10 plants that I found out in the wild and brought back to my homestead 12 years ago. And now we have a 4x8 area that we're constantly having to keep in check. And we're producing about 30 pounds of tubers per square foot. Without any irrigation, without any fertilizer, without any care about the cold, without any care about the heat, without any care about anything. The only thing I have to do is make sure they don't take over the rest of the yard. That's all I have to do. And I'm producing 30 pounds per square foot in a 4x8 area. Actually, I think we've expanded by 4x12 because I gave up on the last 4 feet. I was fighting them for too many years and just let them have it. So you cannot tell me that that is not a dependable food source. And if I don't eat it, I have neighbors that raise pig. If I don't want to eat it, I can feed them the pig to the pig. The pigs produce really good meat off that sunchoke, off the stalks, off the leaves, off the tubers, off every single square inch of it. And then I get a piece of bacon at the end of the year, or I get a pound of ham hocks, or whatever it may be that my neighbor wants to give me that year in return for a few weeks of feeding them sunchokes. So there's definite reciprocity there. The last thing I was going to say is we were talking about sustainability of food sources with the ducks. I can raise crops that feed my ducks. I raise wheat, I raise buckwheat, I raise corn, I raise millet, I raise amaranth, and then this year we've also fed them a lot of bugs over the years from our compost. There are compost bug consumers every single time. They're my pest control for the garden because they eat all the slugs and snails off my brassica. The last thing that I do is we're building a soldier fly farm this year, a greenhouse, so that we can raise enough protein to feed them throughout the year. And that way I don't have to spend so much. If you're looking for one animal to not have to worry about too much with food, and it's a bird, geese can get 98% of their food, their nutrients from grass. They're loud though. That's the only complaint I have. They are loud. You do not understand how loud a goose is until you meet a goose in person. They are loud. I think that's everything I can think of.
Awesome, Caleb. There was so much in there. You know, I think what I'd like to highlight, we're gonna maybe transitioning into the foraging component in a second here, and starting to work with the land beyond what we're growing. But I think what I'd like to highlight for those of you that are, and I can see by the chat that there are definitely some experienced folks in the crowd, but those of you that are kind of new to thinking about growing food, I hope you can see how, you know, Laura and I live in sand. Caleb lives in clay. Every ecosystem is going to have things that do really, really well there and things that struggle. Where we live, brassicas do really well. So brassicas being like broccoli and kale. And I love broccoli because it just produces over and over. Like you get that initial floret, but then it just keeps sending up sprouts, and you literally get months of food off of a single broccoli plant. Like they're like one of the like high leverage crops in our garden. But I have friends down in the city that they just can't grow brassica because of the beetles that come and eat them. And their brassicas just get destroyed, and it's just not even worth growing them. So it's really important to basically know what works in your ecosystem. So I really recommend, if you're just getting started, you know, pick a couple plants and just do a few and just try, just go for it, experiment, do it on a small scale, and you're going to learn what works well and what doesn't. The other thing I wanted to highlight there, you know, Caleb, it was awesome that you brought up sunchokes at the end there. So we just chatted about rabbits, ducks, and sunchokes as three things for like serious resiliency. We already chatted about the reasons behind them. One of my favorite gardening books I came across a couple of years ago is called The Resilient Gardener. I'm forgetting the name of the girl. Do you remember the name of the author of that book, Laura, or anyone else?
I can go take a look on our bookshelf for a second.
Sure. Or if anyone knows the name, put it in the chat there. It's just on the tip of my tongue. But there's a book called The Resilient Gardener. Carol Deppy. Yeah, someone already got it there. Thanks, Lo. And the essence of this book, you know, is that a lot of us design gardens for good times. But when we actually need them, it's likely going to be hard times. You know, whether that's hard times because the economy has collapsed and everyone's struggling financially, or it's hard times because like I'm sick or someone in my family's sick, or I'm really stressed out because of something going on and I've actually got very little time for my garden. And if my garden is reliant on me having to put a lot of time into it, or, you know, then it's not actually a resilient garden. It actually falls apart. So what are those things that are actually truly resilient and truly hardy? And like Caleb said, his sunchokes, he does so little and they just come back and they produce a ton of food. I think about a few other ones on our homestead, like our asparagus. I love, like asparagus is a perennial crop and it comes back year after year. And, you know, we compost on it once a year. And outside of that, it's basically no work. And it comes back year after year after year. And we get a lot of asparagus. Like we have more asparagus than we can eat in the springtime. So, you know, that's another example for me of a really hardy crop. Now, asparagus might not grow in your area because of pests, but that would be your research project coming out of tonight. It's like, what are the really hardy crops for your region that are easy to grow in abundance in, whether it's dry, whether it's wet, you know, even if you neglect them for a while. And there'll be crops like that for every ecosystem. And if you want to take a leap forward in your self-reliance, learn what those crops are for your region. I think that's really, really important. I'm going to share my favorite crop, and then I'm going to pass it over to Laura and Caleb, and we're going to start chatting a little bit about foraging. Caleb, maybe I'll prep you with a question here. Actually, I'll prep both of you with this question because this is kind of a fun one. So we've chatted about garden crops a little bit. And both of you, I know, forage. Caleb, you also hunt and you fish. It'd be kind of fun to chat about, like, what is your annual food cycle? Like, what are you kind of thinking about throughout the year? And I know that could be the whole talk. So if you were to like really bullet point that down in just a couple of minutes or a couple of points, What does an annual food cycle look for you, and what's really on your radar trying to live in balance with the land throughout the year? As you're thinking about that question, I'll share mine. So the other big game changer on our homestead has been growing mushrooms, like by a long shot. Mushrooms are incredibly nutrient dense. They're medicinal. They have protein. They have vitamins. And you can grow an incredible amount of mushrooms in a small space. All of our annuals that we grow, they're a lot of work. Like right now, we were literally planting tomato seeds last night, and now we got to grow them up under lights, which takes energy. It takes watering. Then we need to transplant them. Then we need to prune them. You're basically tending them the whole way through their life cycle. And tomatoes are awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like we actually are able to can a lot of tomato sauce and salsa. It's definitely a big part of the homestead. But how the tomatoes are different than our mushrooms, we have mushroom logs that have been producing for 8 or 9 years. And we inoculated them once with shiitake mushroom spore. So it was a bit of work, like a couple days of work the first year, to have 9 years of food with basically no tending after that first year. Like our mushroom logs, we literally just harvest from. We do almost no other tending on them. And so what other crop is going to give you 8 or 9 years of food for a couple days of work? And the amount that you can grow in a really small space. And for urban folks, you could grow mushroom logs behind a shed in a backyard. You could grow them on an urban balcony if you have a way to keep them moist. And you can also grow mushrooms inside. I teach a whole course on mushroom growing, but I teach people how to grow them in 5-gallon buckets in straw, which you could literally do indoors. So mushrooms are a really great one as well. I'll maybe throw my link up there for the course afterwards, but if anyone's interested about learning mushrooms, I have a whole course called the Mushroom Grower Course. So I'm going to pass it over to Laura or Caleb. Who wants to go on that last question, thinking about annual food cycles?
Go for it, Lo.
Is it, you want me to keep it to like the wild foraging or with the garden included?
I was thinking about starting to transition into the foraging, but really, whatever you're inspired to talk about on that topic.
It definitely, it feels like it begins right now, for land-based people, New Year's isn't really in January. So it's been so nice. We took a few years off maple syrup just because I had a few medical things over a few years that all kind of came up in the spring. So maple syrup in the, in the new year, we'll call it. So just wrapping up now. So really working for me, like it's that late winter, early spring is working with the trees. So I harvest a lot of conifer needles, for medicine, for food. For Wild Muskoka, I make a number of like spices and infused vinegars and things with conifers and storm damaged conifers. We actually had a tree, big white pines. We had a bad ice storm last week, but winter is very much around harvesting those storm damaged boughs. And it's like those conifer trees are like designed to release their branches when they're underweight. And then harvesting the maple sap is like the beginning. And then there's like a breath with the melt out. Smelts. The melt out comes with the smelts that start running up the creeks. And then you get this like super rich, fatty food and smelts are actually not even a native species. So it feels really good to actually go that's why you're allowed to go in the creeks and net them. But yeah, smelting, and then the green plants start coming on, the very first green plant are the leeks. We only harvest leek leaves, but the leek leaves, and then it's the cascade of early greens that come from there. It's like it's just a salad bowl in that early springtime. So the green plants of the springtime, it's like it starts from the forest floor and then goes up the different forest layers. So that's why you get the wild leeks and violets and the early dandelion greens and the spring beauties, and all of these edible greens start from the ground up. And then you get the shoots, the solemn seal shoots. That's when asparagus is coming on. Asparagus is a shoot. And the blue bead lily shoots and all these different wild green shoots. The Japanese knotweed, the garlic mustard. Japanese knotmeat makes these wonderful shoots that you can eat. And yeah, and then it just moves up the forest layer up to the point where there's this narrow window where you can actually eat the tree leaves. Like beech and basswood trees, 2 native trees in our region, you can eat the leaves of them, but only for a very short window. So I always think of spring as Caleb saying, eat your invasives. Learn those plants first. If you're new to foraging, learn which invasive plants grow in your area and eat them first, for sure. But yeah, so spring is orange greens. The nettles, we do big nettle harvest spring through summer. And you can get consecutive, like you want to, as one of my high leverage plants to like harvest in the wild, but also to like pick somewhere on the edge of your property to grow, kind of the same way Caleb's talking about the like the sunchokes. The same time, make like a nettle patch somewhere and like talk about a perennial green that's so nutrient dense. That is a plant to get to know. So kind of late spring transitioning into summer, nettles start to come on. The berries, the strawberries are the kind of the first berry to come in the early summer. So then it goes for berries. It's like so wild strawberries or cultivated strawberries. Again, later in the summer is we grow high bush blueberries, but then also, especially if you go a bit further north than here, you can start to get into the wild blueberries in much more abundant term. Oh yeah, spruce tips, beginning of summer, spruce tips for sure. I harvest quite a bit of those every year. So it's almost like greens early on, and then the fruits of things as the summer. And if I start talking about individual species, we'll be here for a long time. But it's that idea: greens in the early spring, fruits of later on in the year. Mushrooms, kind of, for me, the wild mushrooms, a lot of the ones, it kind of for me starts with reishi in the summertime, but then the edible wild mushrooms kind of really start to kick off at the end of August. And then there's acorns. And it's kind of like, for me, like there's this period in the late summer where mushrooms and acorns become really important to collect. I feel like a squirrel, just like I just think of squirrels just picking the way they pick mushrooms and like are drying them and then are making their little acorn stashes. I feel very much, I have to try to remind myself not that the squirrels are not my competition. Like there's enough for both of us. But I feel like a little squirrel out there picking my mushrooms and picking my acorns. Yeah, so it's and then fall, when the cold temperatures start coming and the energy from the upper part of the plants are going into the ground, then it's the roots. And it's really before the ground freezes, it's just collecting that life energy that has been caught up in the plants all summer and harvesting the dandelion roots and the burdock and sarsaparilla. And then that's when you're also bringing in, your potatoes and your root veggies and starting to pull together. And then I know my individual life gets busy in the fall, but then, and hunting is what kind of wraps our year, and bringing in that meat and butchering rabbits. But that's kind of how I'm following the plants, the foraging cycle through the year.
Maybe just while you're still speaking here, let's chat a little bit about foraging for a moment here, and then we'll bring Caleb on with that similar question. Something, a question that comes up, foraging is definitely, like, the interest in it is growing right now, like on a more mainstream kind of scale. And there's definitely concerns about doing it sustainable. So maybe if you want to share a few thoughts on, how to get started in foraging, and then how do you ensure that you're actually doing it ethically and sustainably? I think this would be a great segue for that, since we've opened up the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important for me, I'm very much a relationships based person, and so I want to think about every species that I'm harvesting as being a kin that I'm in relationship with. And so it has taken me years of building relationship to to harvest a variety of things. And so when people are beginning, Caleb had made that eat your invasive. So if you're just new to foraging, I want to kind of like invite you to look at it less as like, I want to go out in the forest and like pick wild things and like get a beautiful basket, pictures of for Instagram, and like the goal, make it less goal orientated of going out to just like find things, and have it be a bit more I'm going to build relationship with this species. Because for me, even a lot of the species that I may or may not harvest, it's about just encountering them out in the wild and having a seeing of it first, and like recognizing it and being like, oh hey friend, like kind of like the same way we get excited about the birds returning in the spring. It's like I see plants. Mushrooms are a good example for this. I teach wild edible mushroom classes. I teach a lot about foraging. People would probably be surprised how few wild mushrooms I actually eat, because we grow so many shiitakes and other mushrooms. We have an abundance of mushrooms. And so I'm constantly out identifying mushrooms and like just getting to know mushrooms, continuing to learn mushrooms. I do love I'll harvest small amounts, but it's like I don't want to pick something just for the sake of picking it. Like I don't want to go foraging just for the sake of foraging. And so if you can start with invasive plants, start with what's abundant around you. That's your first goal. Again, that permaculture principle of observation. What are the things that are abundant around you? If you live in the city, are mulberries like falling all over the streets and like into people's driveways? Acorns is a huge example of this. There's acorns in like urban environments that fall onto parking lots that like aren't even getting collected by, because like there's just not enough mammals in the area to collect them all. Like start there. Start with those, again, incredible invasive plants that are really abundant and are really like those people plants. Yarrow brought this concept forward in his talk as part of this series. I'd never heard someone use that term, people plants, and I love that. The plants that grow around people are the very first plants that we should be learning to work with as a forager. And once you're confident and you've developed a relationship with dandelion and purslane and like lamb's quarters and Japanese knotweed and these different things, that plantain, these incredible plants that have multiple different edible parts at different stages, you can do lots of things with them. There's no worry about the sustainability of any of those species. The plants that grow around people want to be in relationship with people. And then if you are one of those people who like lives in the forest and you have lots of native plants around, and like be in relationship with those plants. And we're here talking about homesteading and gardening. Your weeds in your garden not only teach you about your soil health and like different things that you could be doing to improve your soil, but then you can eat your weeds. So your garden like has this whole other crop. Like what a way to look at your garden as an abundant thing when you now are utilizing your weeds. So that's just, that's how I really encourage people to like reframe foraging is not just this like thing I'm going to do out in the forest, but it's a mindset of trying to make good use and being in good relationship with the species that are around you and that are abundant.
Yeah, it's always funny when we do garden tours, because our gardens look unweeded even after we've just weeded them, because there's so many things that people pull out that are just as nutritious as anything else there. And we let all the weeds live in amongst our tomatoes or broccoli. like the purslane's in there, the yellow dock's in there. Like we leave a whole bunch of different species because they don't actually outcompete. They actually bring in more pollinators. So that's a great starting point in foraging, is to actually have a garden and to figure out which weeds are you actually going to allow to live in your garden. And they are.
Yeah. And then you like, then you'll learn the fine balance of like not letting them go to seed, or like, you know, there's relationships that you will learn with time of letting them grow to a certain point, but then maybe like not letting them fully take over, fully seed in your garden. Then I'll cut them and pick them, feed them to the rabbits.
Yeah. And kind of like Caleb spoke about, you know, the artichokes being like this species that was super, super hardy and in abundance. You know, those species exist within the wild plant world as well too. And again, from a sustainability perspective, you know, start to learn what are the species that grow in incredible abundance, and you actually can. So if, let's say, you know, you fall on hard economic times personally, or, you know, for a number of different reasons, you need to actually have more food. You're actually reliant on your own ability to get food. Spend some time now learning what are the species in your area, the wild ones, that actually grow in abundance and you can actually take large amounts of without having a negative impact. Because that's so important, the relationship piece that Laura mentioned there. So for example, wild leeks where we live grow incredibly slow. People love wild leeks. But if we go and harvest an abundance of wild leeks from our patches and we take the bulbs, those wild leeks won't actually be abundant 5 years from now. The acorns, on the other hand, we go into the mature oak forest, we can harvest a lot of those acorns. And there's still tons for the deer and the turkey and everything else because the hills are just rolling with oaks. And we can easily get like a winter's worth of acorns without actually having that big of an impact on the wildlife, and having no impact on the, I shouldn't say no impact, but minimal impact on the regrowth of the forest. Acorns are full of fat, they're full of protein, they store well, you can make them into breads. There's a whole process and technique to processing acorns, but they're a staple food of peoples historically around the world, and often overlooked. So, you know, just like, you know, we talked about what are the agricultural crops of your region that will produce resiliency and abundance, and they're going to be different for each region. Learn what they are in the foraging plants as well. Caleb, where do you want to take us? And just for reference for everybody, we've got about 15 minutes left here. So
that was more for me than any of you.
That wasn't a challenge to you, Caleb. What do you want to share about kind of the annual cycle and food here as we start to
so homestead? The beautiful thing is a lot of what Lo said is exactly what I'm doing. So I'm not going to try and reiterate everything she said and repeat the same stuff because it's pretty much the same cycle. I'm just going to describe what I'm doing throughout that year. I think the way to put it. So like we just finished our sugar bush here a week and a half ago. We produced about 6 gallons of syrup, which is pretty low, but we only did 20 taps this year, so that's reasonable in my eyes. And then while sugar bush is happening, just to remind everybody, we're Anishinaabe, we're Ojibwe, we live in our community, we harvest how we harvest from our perspectives and from our pedagogy and our teachings. So some of these things I'm going to describe be viable for you. I just want to make that clear. But while we're sugar bushing, especially during those last 2-3 weeks of the sugar bush, we have shotguns with us because the geese are coming back and the ducks are coming back. This past weekend, my ceremony brother and I took my son out for his first duck hunt, and he got to carry back a wood duck, which was absolutely amazing for me to watch my son holding this duck and having love for that duck while he was carrying it, and like amazed by how soft the duck was, just like the ducks we have at the house. So he had a very good understanding already of where food comes from, and now he got to see it from a hunting lifestyle, which was, I'm going to be honest, I cried. But anyways, moving on. So we're hunting at that time. As those leeks and fiddleheads are coming up, we're harvesting those, processing those. Just like Lo and Chris, I only harvest the leaves, and I go to new patches every time. I leave the patches that I harvest the year before. I disperse their seeds. I transplant leeks that may be getting in places where development is going to be happening. I'll transplant them. We have wild leeks now growing in my garden where the duck pond is because we figured that's a good spot for them rather than being where an ATV trail got built. All that kind of stuff. And then from there, we're getting into gigon, fish. We just scouted last night. We're getting ready for the walleye run. We're getting ready for what we call oga or walleye. Some people call them pickerel because Ontario is weird. They'll call the walleye a pickerel, even though pickerel are a seafaring fish. Anyways, we go after walleye. We don't have smelt down here. Last year, I got to join Lo and Chris on my very first smelting expedition, which was absolutely amazing. Down here, we're spearing those bigger fish. So we'll be getting walleye in the next week or so. And then right after the walleye, we wait about a week and the sucker come in. And there's different rivers and different bodies of water that we have to go to and venture out to get those animals and bring them home. And we harvest with spears sustainably because it's a visual harvest. You don't get to just cast a line and bring in whatever you caught. We aim for those males that are not going to be breeding, that are in the big swarms and they're on the outskirts and they're not going to get to those eggs and fertilize. We take them. We can do that with a spear. You can't do that with a fishing line. At least I can't, and I've not met anybody that can so far. So we are sustainable with how we spear. We are sustainable with how we hunt in the spring for ducks and geese. We are sustainable in how we do it. We have our own teachings and pedagogy and protocols around all that stuff. We have our ways. It's not what a lot of people describe as poaching or hunting out of season and all that kind of stuff. We have our seasons. We have our systems of regulations. Don't worry about that. We're not the ones wiping out the moose or the walleye or whatnot. Beyond that, we get into that harvest of planting season. That's what I'm getting ready right now. This is the Anishinaabeg time to get the grounds ready, burn the grasses, burn the brush, get everything burned down, build up our tar, build up our ash, get all that back in the soil and get the ground nice and warm so that when the plants come up, they're ready to grow well. That's both for in our gardens, but also on a lake called Rice Lake here in Ontario. That's traditional name was not Rice Lake because every lake out here had wild rice, and we'll get to that later. This is Palmadash Skoldeong or Pimadash Skoldeong. This is the lake where the grass is burned. This is where we've been building black oak savanna for 8,000 years. Anishinaabeg have done that, not Western agriculture, not the natural ecosystem. We terraformed this entire landscape to suit our needs and the environment's needs. There's birds and animals out here that depend on those ecosystems because they adapted and evolved with it. They need that ecosystem. We burn the brush because we're supposed to as Anishinaabeg people. And so we do that. We're preparing the lands and getting that ready. And in about a month or so, we start putting the plants into the ground. And we're getting all those beautiful things happening with all the compost and everything else that's naturally happening in the ground, the nematodes and protozoa and all that crazy stuff going on. Then we get into harvest season. From June all the way until, I'd say, late October, there's different things we're harvesting. We're going after birch bark, hickory bark, all those things to be able to make our tools for later harvest. To gather berries, I need baskets. To winnow wild rice, I need a tray that I can winnow with. I have to have all those things. And so I include birch bark and bark harvesting as my part of foraging for that term, if we're going to use that term for this. I like to use the word getting. I'm getting bark. I'm getting ducks. That's just the term that always kind of works in my head with my language. No shade on anybody that uses the word foraging or harvesting. That's not what I'm doing here. That's just the word that makes sense in my head. July, we're getting into the berries. We're getting raspberries. We're getting some blueberries. Some blueberries are more in August, I noticed, but down here we kind of have these two different seasons in the low bush blueberries. They seem to pop in July and pop again in August. The earlier run seems to be a lot lower, so we don't usually pick them because we want to leave that out for the animals and for natural seed dispersal. We have a lot of serviceberry in my area, so we're often harvesting serviceberry. The reason it's called serviceberry is because of the flowers come out around the time that the ground is good to dig for funeral services for cemeteries. If you ever want to know why it's called serviceberry. Saskatoons are part of that, all those kinds of things. There's a life to all this stuff. It's a full cycle. We're talking linearly, but it's really a cycle no matter how we look at it, just like revolutions. And when we get into that August time, talking about the summertime, getting the berry picking, by the end of August, the corn is getting ready to go brown. We're getting ready to have flint corn because that's what we grow at our house is flint corn, Anishinaabeg Calico Mandamin. And then we also are looking at the other plants. The number one plant in my region that we're always looking at. We love acorn here. Don't get me wrong. I freaking love acorn. It's one of my favorite food sources, especially when we don't have LDD moths wiping out the trees like we've had the last couple of years where I am. But the one staple crop from the landscape is Manoomin. Manoomin being that wild rice I was just talking about. It is, you don't understand love until you see Anishinaabeg people processing Manoomin. You don't truly I've heard people say you don't truly understand love until you get your first child. You don't truly understand love until you meet the person you're going to marry. I'm not disagreeing with any of those. True, unconditional, platonic romantic, however you want to look at it, spiritual love, is when you see my people with that Monoman. It is the most beautiful experience you'll see, is seeing Anishinaabe people harvesting, getting Monoman into the canoe with their Bawaganik, or however you want to say it, your ricing sticks, your knocking sticks. Some people call them knockers, which can turn to a bunch of different jokes when we're out there in the rice fields. Rice fields, like when you're ricing, it's just laughter and watergrass. That's all you see, is just watergrass, and you hear laughter throughout it. So in the right conditions, it's beautiful. In the wrong conditions, it's kind of creepy. But when you're out there picking that rice and you're having relationship with the rice worms and the ricing spiders, and you're kicking up Manominishiship, the rice ducks, the American black duck, that's what they depend on. I got my first black duck this past fall on Rice Lake, my very first to ever get shot on Rice Lake, in a rice field that finally grew after 15 years of working on that rice field, because Monoman has very specific needs. Just like all plants, just like all beings, they have specific needs. And sadly, due to the Trent Severn waterway system and many other settler colonial constructs, we have a problem growing Monoman where we are, when this was Rice Lake at one time. This lake alone used to bring in 620,000 pounds of Monoman annually, sustainably, consistently. Over 500,000 pounds of rice annually. And we don't have more than 5 pounds harvested on this lake anymore because of the systems that we have here. And so learning that sustainable harvest, where we go out and we're putting seed back where it's supposed to be, and we're taking care of it where it's supposed to be. Now we're seeing black ducks, whose Anishinaabeg name and the Western Minnesota name for them in English as well, the nomenclature for the bird, Manominishiship, the rice duck, the duck that lives in the rice. And we're seeing flocks of 60 in these patches of rice now, when we never saw black ducks in this area before. And so there's a whole relationship of hunting waterfowl. We're going after catfish. We're going after all those beings, getting ready for the fall runs of the salmon coming up right after that Monoman. As soon as the Monoman is done, the acorns start dropping. The corn is fully ready to go. The beans are ready to be pulled in. All those things. And then we start focusing on our hunting. We're focusing on our hunting throughout that fall of deer, moose, in some areas elk and bear and turkey and whatnot. All those beautiful animals that we get to bring in as a protein source, and we use their bones and process the whole animal. I'm literally leaning because I got a scratchy, itchy piece of armrest. So I've got a piece of smoked tan deer resting on it to keep my arm from getting irritated. All that kind of stuff coming from that harvest, from that pull from the land, and getting deer, getting turkey, getting bear, getting salmon. One day I wish to be able to see eel back on my lake and back on my rivers in this area. We got a lot of work to do before we'll see that, but that was a traditional food in this area that was heavily depended on. There's archaeological sites here that were used one time by my ancestors 2,300 years ago, 2,500 years ago. One little cook pit that has 2,500 jawbones from one eel harvest. Like, just amazing stuff there. Hunting and fishing and coming into trapping throughout the wintertime. We bring in, I'd say, about 35 to 40% of the protein that's in our house is beaver. We bring in a lot of beaver. We take about 5 to 6 beaver a year, just my house. And those 5 to 6 beaver, each beaver can be up to the equivalent of one white-tailed deer in meat, depending on the size of the deer and the size of the beaver. Our average beaver, it's about 2 beaver per deer. So if I pull in 5 to 6 beaver, that's 3 deer worth of meat that I brought in. Isn't what eel banned now in Ontario? American black eel is a native species. They're not banned. We're trying to bring them back. You might be thinking about the lampreys and other invasive species. That's the other thing. Is like in May, June, I'm shooting carp. I'm going out bow fishing for carp every single afternoon, and I'm bringing them back. And if they're small, elbow to fingertip, that's food. Anything bigger, garden. Goes right in the garden. I chop it up with that machete that I showed you earlier, and I chop it up and put it into the corn mounds, put it into the garden beds, all that kind of stuff. And it becomes a very nitrogen-rich, very calcium-dense fertilizer for those crops. Whereas the smaller ones, people complain about carp all the time. We're going back to eat your invasives. The German carp is an invasive species. I don't care how many people say it's naturalized. It's an invasive species. And the small ones taste delicious. They taste great. Do not think that they're a garbage fish. They're the only true herbivore in these lakes. I live on Rice Lake at the bottom of the Otonabee River, one of the most polluted rivers in central Ontario. The walleye, I'm only supposed to eat 1 walleye a year from this lake. I'm only supposed to eat 2 pike a year, 5 bass a year. I can eat all the carp I want, though, because they don't bioaccumulate as much as those predatory fish. So this whole cycle comes together into meat, veggies, fruit, nuts, roots, all those things. It's part of the whole cycle, and just being out there and getting food and knowing how to get that food, whether it's foraging, knowing how to identify the right plant and how to sustainably harvest it and ethically harvest it, or taking an animal safely and ethically and legally, and whatever other things you need to be concerned about. You just got to know it. You just got to learn it. That's it.
Yeah, so much of this comes down to relationship. I think the overall theme here. Caleb, I think if people want to have a look at the machete that aren't familiar with it,
I just saw these. This is just a machete I picked up when I was in Colombia a few years back. If you're starting with machetes, start with short ones because you don't have as much leverage to worry about them swinging into your toes and lengthening or shortening your toes. This is a plantation style machete or gardener's farmer style machete. They are a very useful tool. You can cut your grass with them. You can harvest thatch with them. You can harvest crops with them. You can dig potato gardens with them, whatever you need. The American black eel is the good eel that we want to see around, is the American black eel.
Awesome. We're going to wrap up in just a second here, and I do want to just pass it over to Laura in a second, Caleb. But while we have it on, I was wondering if you could just chat about opportunities we have coming up for folks that want to get into learning about sustainable hunting, because I know there is an interest. So we in the hunting world, traditionally a lot of people became hunters because their family hunted. And nowadays we have a lot of people that either weren't brought up in hunting families, or maybe you were brought up in a hunting family, but you don't necessarily connect with the values that your family hunts with. And as a hunter myself, I know there's a lot of people that do give hunting a bad reputation. Unfortunately, there is a lot of people that aren't thinking about sustainability. They are not thinking about reverence in the way that Laura and Caleb spot to. So if somebody, is interested in getting into hunting, but they want to ensure that they're doing it sustainably, in right relationship with the land, that they're doing it with skill and with ethics. Do you want to tell them a little bit about some of the opportunities we have coming up?
Oh, heck yeah. So Chris and I run a online program that's also going to be this year having some in-person programming as well with it, called The Hunter's Journey. You can find it at thehuntersjourney.com. It's an online and in-person community that focuses on introducing people, to how to hunt safely and ethically and sustainably, all the way to finding people to go hunting with, all the way to finding places to go hunting and learning how to find places. It's a huge encyclopedia of hunting knowledge. We have some of the coolest people in the world working together on this course. Cal and Sandy Reed. We've got Preston Taylor. We've got all these amazing coming in to help teach this course. John Van Sickle. So many amazing people. It was Chris's brainchild, but I'm definitely a happy stepfather for this program. I am a proud stepfather of this program. It's a beautiful, beautiful program that I'm proud to be part of every single chance I get to be. It's what kept me sane during all of COVID. I can tell you that right now. This is the number one thing that kept me sane, which is saying a lot because I'm already got a few screws loose. So yeah, I absolutely love The Hunter's Journey, and you can check it out at thehuntersjourney.com. I think Chris has a link for it as well.
Yeah, I just threw the link up on
right there.
People should see it.
Perfect.
And I will just also mention, Mateo's in the course as well, so he's speaking for it there. We are going to be doing a couple free sessions, or those of you that are just interested in exploring the idea of hunting. We have a series coming up called Hunting with Heart. So I'm going to actually remove the link there to the Hunter's Journey course and throw the Hunting with Heart one up here for a second. And if you'd like to just come to a free exploratory session to learn more about, how to get started, what hunting's all about, then we'd love to have you on. There's 2 sessions coming up later this month. And yeah, if you have any questions about that course, feel free to reach out to me after this call, chris@chrisoutdoors.ca. And Laura, I'd like to pass it over to you. Do you have any closing words you'd like to leave folks with tonight?
Yeah, I'm just so thankful all these people came to spend their evening with us. I do run in-person classes. I don't have anything online here in the Muskoka area, but they're pretty full this year. But definitely, if you wanna come learn more with me, you can find out about my programs on my website at wildmuskoka.com. I also have, I can give everyone a discount code of WILD15 to give you 15% off if you want to order anything. This week coming up, I'm going to be with Wild Muskoka in Ottawa at the Signature Show. So that starts Thursday and goes through the weekend. And then there's some fun in-person events that I'll be at throughout the summer. Love Fest we're having in Dorset, which is a pretty fun event. I'm going to be teaching at Back to the Roots Herbal Gathering in September. And just love to actually see people face to face in person and talk plants. Especially you can come see me to show. If I'm selling stuff in my business, I always love having side tangents and talk about hunting and foraging and just like what birds you're seeing. And it's always such a highlight to me if someone comes and they say that they, met me or they came to one of these talks, and those in-person connections really, really fuel me at those big events where I'm in maybe a new town where I don't know many people. So just hope to see some of you in real life sometime.
And Laura, you mentioned the all the teaching, but you also have Wild Forage foods and
Yes.
drinks. So the Wild 15 coupon code. I just put the link up if anyone wants to check it out. 15% off. But hold on. Do you want to tell us quickly about your
Yes, this is the business that I built out of with the intention of wanting to do something with plants. I ethically forage based on the kind of principles I talked about tonight, plants from around our region, and then use them to make different really fun things that you can use for cooking with and making drinks with, and just fun ways to infuse the flavors of the forest in your meals at home.
Awesome. Mateo asked, any gatherings happening close to the GTA? Aren't we down at the beaches sometime?
Yeah, I'm going to be, that's a beaches. That's a sale that I'll be at in June in the beaches. And then a cool herbal gathering called Back to the Roots will be happening. If you looked it up, Back to the Roots Herbal Gathering, that happens in September, just a little north of Toronto. And I'll be teaching there as well as like a ton of other amazing herbal teachers, and Rosemary Gladstar, who's I'm really excited to know that she's coming up this year.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I just have a couple of final words I'd like to kind of close us out with tonight. And I am sorry for all the links right at the end, folks. This whole series has been free and we put a lot of work into it. And by being able to let folks know about some of the offerings, that's what supports all of the presenters and folks like myself coming on. I am going to throw up this link one more time because I didn't mention it that I was putting it up before. But for anyone that was interested in the mushrooms course, I just threw the link up there as well. And if you enter Wild 30, you'll get $30 off the mushrooms course. So this is our last call. This has been a really fun series. I feel like some really potent calls. If you're just starting to tune in, the replays are going to be up for quite some time. I don't have a set kind of timeline on that yet, but I will send out a follow-up email in the next couple of days that has all of the past calls. And yeah, follow along with Chris Outdoors. I'll probably do things like this again in the future. And I wanted to send a big shout out to everybody that's been part of the series. So thank you everyone who's been attending. Thank you for those who have been telling your friends. Thank you to all the amazing presenters that we've had on, Dr. Naeem, Shannon Simmons, Elaine from Verge, Yara Willard from Wild Rose College, Starhawk and Charles, Andrew McMartin from the Pine Project, and of course, Caleb and Laura tonight. Big thank you to all of you folks for everything you've contributed. And of course, big gratitude to the earth and, everything that it does to support us, the birds, the trees, the animals, the plants, the waters, just much love for, the magic of life, I'll call it. So thank you, everybody. We'll stay in touch via email. Hopefully we'll see some of you folks in person or in classes or at events. And safe travels. And I hope this series helps you feel a little bit more confident about some of the changes we're facing in the world and inspires you to take some proactive steps to adapt and improve your self-reliance and your resiliency in changing times. So I'll leave it there and say goodnight, everybody. That felt like a great, great close off to the night. Peace out. Caleb, did you want to share anything there, or are you just putting your screen on to wave?
Just saying goodbye.
All right. Night, everybody.